Welcome back to Pando's podcast. Today we have exciting guests, Vince from ElectricFish. So, I guess to start off, Vince, would you like to introduce yourself and a little bit about your company?
Yeah, it sounds great. And thanks, Nicole and Joseph, for having me on the podcast today. I'm Vince Wong, co founder and COO of ElectricFish. We build and deploy flexible microgrids that unlock fast charging and emergency backup power for grid constrained sites, primarily targeting fleets, but also public charging as well.
Wonderful.
And yeah, we're based in the Bay Area, have been around for about 5.5 years. Started, around the mission of helping to tackle this thorny problem of electrifying the entire economy, but starting with transportation and thinking about um, the very critical grid infrastructure that would need to be built to actually support it. So that's what we're up to at ElectricFish.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. I can't wait to hear more about the company. I guess, Joseph, for those viewers that are just tuning in for the first time, could you give a brief overview of Pando Electric?
Yeah, so for those of you who've already watched some of our podcasts, I'm the head of corporate strategy here at Pando Electric. We make electric vehicle charging outlets that are specifically designed for multifamily facilities like apartments and condos. The really big takeaway that you get when you put in and install a smart outlet over a traditional charging system, level 2 charging system, and we're going to get into sort of the differentiators between Pando Electric and ElectricFish on that level. But the big differentiator for us when we go with a level 2 charging outlet is we actually save our customers quite a lot, up to 70% on their upfront installation costs. And on the back end, because it's just an outlet, there's absolutely no maintenance. We usually throw this line out at most of our in our sales pitches and any conferences we're at, where we ask people how often do they actually maintain their outlets today, and we typically get some fairly confused. Should I be maintaining it? The answer, you don't need to maintain outlets. They kind of just hang out on the wall, and that's really what we're trying to bring is the same similar experience that a lot of single-family homeowners have to multifamily facilities.
Thank you for the introduction. So, both companies are EV charging, and I think oftentimes it kind of gets confusing with like how companies are differentiated. They just say EV charging, oh, you guys are the same. So could you guys maybe kind of like start off with a little bit of differences, like maybe the levels of charging? Because I know that you guys are not the same in that aspect.
Go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, happy to go first. So at ElectricFish, we build really fast DC fast chargers that are integrated with battery storage. And so we can do up to 350 kW. That corresponds to around 800 to 900 volts of architecture. And yeah, this is very well adapted for both, really across all class types, especially as we're seeing a lot of movement to bigger batteries and just faster voltage architectures, anything from light duty to medium duty and even heavy duty. We certainly have interest in partners across all class types. And yeah, the way we're approaching it, we certainly have developed this product and company to tackle EV charging and EV charging infrastructure. It's a containerized solution that, as I mentioned before, integrates battery storage with a proprietary design and set of power electronics that allow us to deploy a 350 kilowatt charger in a very grid limited scenario where you might only have the equivalent of 30 kilowatts. In one case, we worked with a 5 kilowatt grid connection, which was a 208 volt. And basically, it was able to install that system in just a number of days once it was shipped to the site versus what you might typically see with months and sometimes years long timelines. Permitting for us is a lot simpler. We still have to go through permitting like everyone else, but because we're able to reverse or be backwards compatible with these lower voltage grids, it gives us significant advantages from the utility's point of view of viewing this as a small load versus as a large load. And that battery storage in the system helps us to keep energy costs low for charging itself, and then also acts as a resiliency buffer, either for the charging operations or it's also set up bidirectionally where it can send power back to the site or to the grid. And so, yeah, EV charging is very much a core offering of the product, but we really think of it as a flexible energy asset that is capable of doing charging, but also backup power and grid services.
I have a question there because I think a lot of times in this industry we end up getting a lot into the weeds, and I think we overstep what a lot of lay people do and don't understand about electric vehicles and how they charge and how all this works. So often I'm reminded that most people still see EVs similar to like an ICE vehicle, internal combustion engine, where the reality is it's actually just sort of like a battery pack with wheels. So I'm wondering, I have a few questions. How long does it take typically, across average, I know each vehicle is different, to charge fully? So if someone showed up to an ElectricFish station at 0 and they could accept the full 350, how long would that typically take?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it's generally unadvisable to start at 0 or go to 100, but just playing that scenario through, um, I have an Ioniq 5. It's a really great car, won a lot of awards a few years ago. Um, I've seen a peak of 250 kW on that vehicle. Very few vehicles in the light duty realm actually charge at 350, even if it's advertised. But 250 is still really powerful. And so, with our charger at least, it'd be somewhere in the realm of 25 minutes to go from 0 to 100, but very, reliably getting from 20 to 80 in 18 minutes. And this is a function of the way the vehicle is set up and also how our charger is set up and not throttling the power. We aim to provide a very consistent amount of throughput to that vehicle, whereas some other of the other fast chargers I've seen in the market tend to throttle power, and that may be a function if there's multiple of these chargers at a site, and maybe they're trying to balance demand on the grid. They'll maybe dial back some of the max output capabilities. But yeah, that's something that we're really looking to solve.
Yeah, and you don't suffer that because you have the battery packs on site that's sort of supplying the energy, and you're not pulling directly from the grid itself.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a pretty substantial battery storage module in the charger itself. It's 350 kilowatt hours of usable capacity. There's another 50 kilowatt hours that's used just to maintain and operate the system. But that affords us a lot of ability to pull directly from the battery, as you stated, versus from the grid. We do have that ability in the worst case scenario. If our storage module is completely empty, charging will still happen at the local grid connection, whatever that was. But yeah, with that amount of storage, it affords us the ability to provide that for much longer than typically possible.
Yeah, and I think from like the Pando side, we see the relationship between DC fast and so at home sort of level 2 charging is extremely symbiotic. So to give people some sort of understanding, you called out the sort of the 20 to 80% is about it's a little under 20 minutes on your system. With ours, we're looking at at least 4 hours before we can do the same thing. And the difference really is that I have the luxury that car is going to be parked in a parking space for probably 12 to 15 hours overnight, whereas you have the absence of time. You probably need to rotate people a lot more. Do you see a lot of that? Do you see a lot of like sort of the time analytics coming into play when you're looking at sort of rush hour versus non, that type of scenario happening?
Yeah, no, great questions, and just want to echo off the bat how symbiotic they are. I've seen generally a portfolio of approaches, whether it's in the fleet space or even increasing the consumer lens as more charging infrastructure gets built out, en route or at the destination, which could be multifamily as well. So folks are typically depending on or leveraging a mix of charge points. But yeah, at least in the fleet space, they're largely able to schedule, their charging operations. In the public charging domain, we are beginning to increase our footprint in that use case. But what we've designed our system for is, there's been some other, I guess, systems where you can even schedule your place in a queue. With our technology, we were trying to really simulate the gasoline filling experience of going up to an electric pump, if you will, and not needing to download an app, and like at a gas station, and then just being on your way in 5 to 10 minutes. So with the public charging use cases that we provide, we are typically citing that we have time capped sessions. So we limit the sessions to about 10 minutes, and so that's not going to be a great fit for every vehicle that maybe isn't up to speed with the newer charging technologies. But increasingly, many of the OEMs are moving that direction to compete against the other models that are out there now. And so yeah, there is that kind of that use case that everyone tries to over build for, that 5 to 9 p.m. peak period. We've sized it such that we can do in the realm of 25-ish top-off sessions per day. So that's dispensing around 25 kilowatt hours per vehicle. So it's not going to be getting you to full, but in this paradigm of a time capped session, it works quite well. And then of course for fleets, which is really our beachhead and core focus, these are less relevant.
Go ahead, Nicole. I was just very curious.
No worries. Thank you for the wonderful questions, Joseph. Vince, I know that you mentioned kind of being like modeling after the gas pump being an electric pump. Was that kind of the inspiration behind the company? Because I'm saying this because a lot of people are very concerned with the amount of times it takes to charge a car, or potentially like running into range anxiety. So I'd love to learn more about kind of why you started the company, and then like really the value.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I was getting started on earlier, I think increasingly we're going to find that EV drivers are going to leverage a mix of solutions, and we're very supportive of the the equitable pushes to get more charging in multifamily. There's a bunch more now in public settings where or workplace settings as well, where you can dwell for longer. I have a couple of friends working in the curbside charging space as well. But certainly, there are going to be those people as well who just are in a pinch and need something quick, very much like at a gas station. And so we were looking to solve that gap, about 5.5 years ago. And, I think some states have done very well in getting that started. Certainly, here in California, but other states like Massachusetts. But that said, there's still a long way to go, especially on key highway corridors. I know the California Energy Commission is looking to further invest along some of these key corridors, just because it remains a largely unaddressed problem. I think in some of the very high traffic dense areas, you have pretty decent coverage, but there are still queues that you find at some of the most popular charging stations, just because of demand outpacing the supply. And so I think that's generally a really promising sign for this industry that there's a lot more work to do. And yeah, so that was a core motivation. And then of course, just thinking about, once this infrastructure gets deployed, is it resilient? Can we count on it during even a brownout or potentially wildfire or hurricane? This is increasingly something that we get asked about in places like the Central Valley, where flooding and extreme heat waves are both concerns. And so, yeah, those combined really formed the initial design prompt for ElectricFish.
Yeah, I think one of the things that recently came up for me is this idea that the U.S. is kind of becoming increasingly a laggard when it comes to electric vehicles. So the U.S. was way out in front, 12, 15 years ago, and now we're definitely third place behind the EU, and then China's way out in front. And I started to think about, well, why is this, outside of sort of the obvious of, there's incentivization and there's a lot more buy-in from those cultures. But I think one of the biggest things is the issue that you're trying to tackle, which is sort of the United States vehicle infrastructure and how we get around is very car centric, whereas Europe and China are almost the opposite, where you have a lot of train systems to get around. And so I think in that we're going to have to really build out tons of stations across the United States. I mean, well more than we already have, and then well more than either of those two locals, because they're going to have a lot of people who say, I'll just take the train, I only have to drive it down so far to a train depot. Whereas here it's like the whole journey has to be end to end in the car. So I'm wondering, are you taking into consideration some of those factors and those variables where, you know, you're seeing places that are seeing queues? It might make sense to actually open up in a lot of ways, like how we have now. You have a gas station one across the street from the other, to sort of absolve that problem.
Yeah, I think I personally believe that the pie is big enough for multiple players and solutions to coexist, even in the same block, as you've alluded to. I mean, I think, yeah, many of the gas station franchisees have figured out that, you know, once you reach a certain level of adoption or penetration of foot traffic, there's enough to go around. And I'm certainly seeing really promising signs from a number of the OEMs. So Tesla, of course, you know, was very proactive and had the foresight to build out this really robust supercharger network. It's been really heartening to see some of the other OEMs also stepping up, whether it's Rivian with their adventure waypoints, you know, national parks, or, you know, like Ayana, which is that consortium of a number of EV automakers. And so in general, we just need a lot more. You know, the grid does remain a bottleneck, just getting that interconnection. And so this is very much something that we want to unlock, you know, being able to, a lot of these sites that exist, whether it's a gas station, you know, we've talked with many gas station franchisees over the years, or car dealerships, or other, you know, forms of retail, are really great candidates, because a lot of them have, you know, the motivation or the desire to electrify, but maybe not the patience or the savvy. And so with their older electrical infrastructure, you know, technology like ours can come in and basically retrofit into what they already have as frictionlessly as possible. But yeah, I'm also seeing for some of the, you know, fleet operators as well, you know, they're waiting in many cases 3 to 5 years from their utility to get multiple megawatts of infrastructure installed at that site. And so a lot of them in the interim are sometimes using en route or even public charging locations just to fill that bridge. And so I think, yeah, these are really positive demand signals. You know, it could obviously be moving a lot faster, but I think with the momentum we're still seeing at the states and even municipal levels, and, you know, the sort of doubling down by number of key EV automakers, I think these combined will continue to push the industry where it needs to head. I would, you know, maybe posit a question around maybe some of the themes you're seeing in, you know, multifamily, and where you think some of the traditional hurdles have been and maybe how it's changed, as I know there's like the REACH codes, which have been implemented to spur the adoption of more electrified parking spots. And yeah, where do you see kind of that space heading towards? Because that's one I have a little less insight into.
That's a great question. I think in general what we've seen, well, I've seen, Pando's relatively new in the space, but what I've seen over the last decade has been a slow but steady shift from EV charging is a nice luxury amenity to have at your Class A property, and you can only install like a couple of them because the rest aren't, it's unlikely to get used very often, to now basically every sort of even market rate property needs to have an EV charging station, probably a bank of them. The other thing that we've always seen here at Pando, and then also at my other job at EverCharge, was it's about every 3 years on average, you'll see the number of EVs double. So you see when you come into a property, you have, you know, it used to be like 3 years later, there was 6 there. And then we could basically start to see that hockey stick curve start to really then escalate after that. Because once people realize that there's a reliable station they can use every night, then the barrier to entry is sort of removed for them. I think one of the things that I'm starting to see a little bit more of is more people in cities are looking at EVs because they simply just don't drive as nearly as far. But more in the suburbs, I'm seeing less and less adoption because they're driving a little bit further. Typically, I'm guessing a lot of those people have, an idea of wanting to go on road trips more often. And because of that, they are more concerned about they have the range anxiety of like, well, I want to go 600 miles down the road, not 300 miles down the road. And I want to be able to charge in 5 minutes, not 25 minutes. And so we are seeing kind of this new gap forming again. And it's great that companies like yours are like sort of coming in and filling those out. We all are also seeing a similar issue to what you've described with the grids within sort of the multifamily space, which is, power is not infinite. That's one of those things that I think a lot of people in the modern world take for granted. We walk into a room, we hit a button, and the lights come on. If you grab somebody from the 1800s and drop them into that situation, they would literally think it was magic. Right? It would be like, whoa, like that would blow their mind. And we just, it's a thing that I don't even think about half the time, right? And so people just assume that I can just keep adding more and more and more. That's not necessarily how the power in any of this works. Like it has to be generated, stored, transferred, all this stuff that goes on from when the generation point to the utilization point that happens there. And what we're seeing a lot of like retrofit properties is they're just running out of power. Not only from like an HVAC system, water heaters, dryer systems, and now EV chargers. So you're looking at a lot of electric loads that are like really starting to spike up again. And I think really that's why the Pando solution works so well, because of our daisy chaining and adaptive load management. We're able to actually still able to charge all the vehicles overnight, but without having to bring in any additional power, any transformer upgrades. Occasionally we have to do like a panel upgrade, which is way less expensive than the transformer. And so we're looking at sort of another engineering problem that is starting to crop up again. I always tell people this, this same issue, at least in my space, existed when, air conditioners came around. When air conditioners came around, it was the same exact problem. You had a bunch of older buildings that barely had any energy. And then all these people wanted to plug in air conditioning for the summer, and you're having like rolling blackouts. This was all in the 1970s. And then they eventually figured out, okay, we can add more generation. We can like lower the dependency of these power hungry appliances. We can turn some stuff off. And eventually we figured out how to balance those loads out. And we have less and less and less of those issues occurring. But now we're starting to see like those start to tick up, especially in California. And it is a lot of electric vehicle usage. But we're also seeing like some really amazing things with microgrids, vehicle to grid, vehicle to X technology starting to crop up, which actually has me very excited about the future because of those types of technologies that do exist.
Yeah, it's really incredible like how quickly this space is shifting, and just a lot of parallels with some of the other sites that we've worked with, and I think this idea around load management, I was at the EPRI Infrastructure Working Council a couple of weeks back, and that was the big theme. There's like so much that we can just do through optimization that helps us not overbuild our infrastructure. And so it's really great to see, Pando's taking that approach to save time and cost for landowners and building owners.
Definitely.
Thank you for all you guys' input. Sorry, I've been you guys have had such a good discussion that I'm I don't want to jump in. I just want to see where this goes. But I think, definitely on my end, I see that people are always very concerned with EV and the transition, especially with the grid. They're always what's going to happen? They think that it's more maintenance. They think that it's too much work, that they honestly just would rather stick to what they know. And now I've kind of been seeing a little bit pivot of maybe electric cars, but hybrid, more or less. Is these concerns are these questions that they should be really focusing on, or is there any other things that you think that they should be more thinking about when it comes to electric vehicles?
Man, that's a heavy question. I mean, we're all skewed in one way, right? I'm a big believer in EVs. I'm I think hybrids are fine. However, like once you start driving an EV, I think you get it more. I think that's really the key here is getting people to just get in the cars and drive them around. And you realize that outside of all of the issues that we've discussed and what you've brought up, Nicole, they're just better cars. Like just that's a full stop. There, that's a better car. Like even on the low end, like it wasn't that long ago that Hyundai and Kia were considered like also rans, but very low on the totem pole. They were considered slow, kind of almost pseudo junky cars, even if they came new off the lot. And like I dare you to go onto a Kia or a Hyundai lot, pick out a vehicle and drive it around, and that car will compete fairly closely with like a 911 Carrera in terms of like performance. So there's luxury items that are different in that 911 Carrera, but in terms of like the car being able to drive, that is what you're going to pay for. On the scale of what you can get now is like much further reduced than where it was. So you're looking at a much better vehicle. Being said, I think one of the biggest issues is kind of what I brought up, which is that the U.S. is based around highway culture and car culture, and you have to drive long distances, and there aren't really good alternatives. If you want to go down to Los Angeles, I live in San Francisco, you want to go down to Los Angeles, you have two options. You can drive, which is 6-7 hours, or you can fly, which is it's an hour, but then you have to tack on all the extra time in the airport, right? And that's it. You could there is a train, but it's like a 12-hour train ride, and like I don't know who wants to put themselves through that kind of misery.
It also goes only to San Luis Obispo, so you still have to figure out.
Yeah.
So
you're gonna hitchhike the rest of the way, but like that's the idea. Like that's kind of one of the other sort of unseen issues is that our infrastructure for how we get around is really not made for a car that can't make that full drive in one go. The thing that I do point out to people is that you're looking at an industry that really only started about 20 years ago, to be truly honest. So you're at the very beginning of this, transformation. This is basically like Model T territory if you were to like look at how the automobile came around. And so there's going to be a lot of changes to how this is all built out. It's weird that all of the same arguments, if you go back and you read about like gas vehicles, when they first came out, the same arguments that are being levied against EVs today were being levied against gas back then. So you can bet against EVs at your own risk. This is going to be a thing. It's going to continue to grow. And the more people who, buy these cars realize how much better they are. McKinsey just did a study. I believe 90% of every person that they interviewed who owned an electric vehicle said that they were going to buy another one after that car. So it's not like all these people are buying them like, oh, I don't want this, and they shift back. No, they buy them, they're like, no, I want more. So
they're also just a lot more fun to drive in my experience, and so I've been really enjoying taking my Ioniq 5, on long road trips around California. And yeah, I think there's also, the arguments around the total cost of ownership, so once you actually have it, it's typically cheaper, especially if you're able to leverage a mix of charging infrastructure and less maintenance, just given I think it's 1/100th or so the number of parts of an ICE traditional vehicle, which would apply to a hybrid as well. And I have a couple of friends who had Toyota Priuses, and unfortunately had their cats stolen a couple of times, and so that's not something that you have to necessarily worry about, at least yet, for an EV. People aren't stealing battery packs out of EVs.
God, I don't know how that'd be a very difficult thing to pull off.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that's one of the other things, like the maintenance. Brakes are one of the big ones that people always overlook because you have, the cars are able to actually slow themselves down because of the electric motor, so you're not having to use your brakes as much. The only thing that I think EVs actually do worse on in terms of maintenance is tires, and that's just because the cars are a lot heavier, so they chew up tires a little faster. But that's about it. So I think to anyone who's out there who's considering shifting from ICE to an EV, I recommend you do, because I guarantee you won't regret it.
Yeah, I have driven a gas car and then an electric car, and I do agree. I do like the electric for certain reasons of like the one pedal drive where you just release your foot and it slows down and you don't have to brake. And I don't know if it's because the gas car that I was driving was like really old, but I was like, the cameras are so nice on the electric. It just like shows you everything. Sometimes it is frustrating because, I mean, it's still technology and it's like saying you're too close. I'm like, I'm not close. I can literally see. I'm like not gonna hit the car. But I definitely do agree that even though there's a little bit of range anxiety I have from the electric car, I still do like the electric car better than the gas car because I don't have a lot of those maintenance, like you need an oil change. I'm like, okay, thanks for telling me, and then you have to like go to the shop and yeah, it's just too much work. But I do agree with what you guys have said. So on my end, I think you guys have done a great discussion. I didn't have too many questions to ask, but that's fine because I think it was a very insightful and meaningful commentary from you guys. So if there's anything you guys want to conclude with, this is the time.
Yeah, I think I'll just piggyback off of something Joseph said, which is that, you know, as much traction and progress we've made in this space, I really like that analogy of like this being the Model T days. It sometimes doesn't feel like that if you read the news. You know, it feels like to some people EVs may just be a fad, but I think what we've seen in other parts of the world is that they are very much here to stay, and we're paying very close attention to, you know, what how the build outs are going in China, places like Norway and the rest of the EU. And I think you know, people are going to continue to experience very tangibly and economically the benefits of going EV, and you know, the potential opportunities that can afford in not just for drivers but also for business owners and fleets that want to have, you know, a station at their property as an additional, you know, income stream. And so that combined with some of the very innovative approaches in load management or resilience and grid services is going to make this even more exciting and fun for everyone involved. So yeah, we're really excited and bullish about this space, and I'm looking forward to being a big part of what drives it forward.
So how can people find you know, ElectricFish or get in contact with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on the internet. We also have like a mailing list on our website. People can sign up. But yeah, I'll be happy to chat with folks if they're interested.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Vince, and it's great to have you on.
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll put all the contact information in the description, so don't you worry. You'll be able to find Vince and ElectricFish very easily. So thank you, Vince, for being our first guest podcaster. It's been very exciting and can't wait to see it be finished and out.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.